candidate for Congress in Utah's 4th Congressional District. Hope you're doing well and fun to visit with you again tonight. Again, as always, please list any comments or questions that you have in the feed and we'll get back to them as soon as we can. And so tonight I'm really excited to have a guest that is just a friend of freedom and a friend of civil rights. And I've had the privilege of being a panel speaker with this person. And we share a couple of passions, and namely free speech on our college campuses, academic freedom on our college campuses. So I'm happy to introduce you to Dr. Johnson. And I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit more thoroughly. Don't leave anything out. Tell us all the awesome things that you've done.
Well, I'm John Johnson, and I'm a professor at the Huntsman School. I teach analytics and entrepreneurship, and I teach a class and teach students how to build their own web-based business. And we're really moving into the analytics space now in a big way. I teach students how to build analytical dashboards and how to work with big data, which is kind of all the rage today. I have a PhD in economics and taught economics for many years. And, I'm a big believer in liberty, and I've read all the great scholars, Bastiat, and I'm a big fan of Bastiat's The Law. And, I think that, so I'm also an entrepreneur. I spent many years in the software business. I started an internet-based business that pretty much revolutionized the way mortgage loans are done. We worked on the collateral side, the appraisal side of the mortgage, and we basically took people and paper out of that process. And in so doing, we kind of changed the way you could think of it as TurboTax for appraisers. And, you may have heard of Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Mm-hmm. We built most of the back-end infrastructure to make that work. But I've been at the Huntsman School now for about 12 years, kind of coming back into academia. It's been nice. It's actually nice coming back into the classroom after you've had some business experience and kind of understand the world these kids are going to be living in. We made most of our money with big data analytics solutions to really help the appraisal process become more efficient. And so, that's kind of the background.
So you're really a unicorn, though, right?
Unicorn, yeah.
You're a unicorn because you're a mythical creature that really doesn't exist in the real world, and that is someone who has. You described yourself as a big liberty supporter, and I think we also heard that you were a college professor, sort of in the same moment there. Is that possible? Does that really exist? There's a college professor that has studied Bastiat?
It is an oddity. And as you found out trying to pass a free speech bill, it's interesting how the universities push back against you the most. But you look at the youth today. I mean, when I was in college, Reagan was the most popular guy on campus, right? And that was the era of the conservatives on college campuses. Most students, I was co-chair of the College Republicans, and we probably had, 300 members. And, we got to work on the White House advance team when Reagan came to Utah. And it was really quite an experience. But at that point in time, most college students were conservatives. And now, as this is a concern of yours, it's a concern of mine, really. And that is that somehow we have to push back a little bit about what I would call the postmodernist social Marxists now that are taking over our campuses. If you think about it, in order to pass the AP history exam now, you have to have read The People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. And this is interesting because it's really, you just as well read Karl Marx as you read that book. And students have lost this notion that Reagan had of the shining city on the hill, right? And the greatness of America and America's founding, and those principles really have been diluted somewhat, and they've actually been changed, and I think it's been somewhat purposeful. So, yeah, this is a passion of mine. I think it's time to push back against some of this that's going on, and I don't know, I don't know where the pushback needs to come from local legislators, or I mean, your position now, going into Congress, what kinds of things do you think can be done there?
Well, so you just said a whole lot of stuff. I mean, you just recounted a whole uh, sort of turning evolution of the college campus in a generation, in a couple generations. I was in high school when Ronald Reagan was sworn in, so that gives you an idea both of how old I am and where I fit kind of in that evolution of being excited for President Ronald Reagan as a high school student to, what is going on our college campuses. And sometimes some people don't want they don't want to acknowledge that this is going on our college campus, but you can really see a, a very strong divide in ideology. And like you said, just the very history, the very essence of American exceptionalism, our exceptional founding. And so what have you seen in your time? You described it very generally, but where is it coming from? And how have we gotten here this fast?
It's really hard to say. I mean, you look at what happened, and I think you brought this up in a debate that we had, well, a forum that we had before, seeing Title IX come onto campuses. And this notion of, what I would call, the postmodernist social Marxist, this idea that you can have your own truth and that truth resides at the individual. And just the small change in the wording on Title IX when it comes to hate speech. It used to be pretty well had to be compared to some defined standard, that there had to be a truth that you compared it to. But when we saw Title IX come in, there's just a small change in there that basically says, if you feel hated, then you're hated, right? It moves it back to how you feel rather than measuring against some objective standards. And I think that has made university administrators very nervous because they don't know quite what to do, right?
Right.
And a lot of university administrators anywhere come out of the social sciences, and those fields have been dominated the last few years by this whole philosophy of, this idea that you can have your own truth, that there is no truth, right? It's a focus on feeling rather than a focus on, some standard that we measure against. And if you think about the whole notion of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, these are natural rights endowed by God, right? And that's very different than this relativistic approach that we have today. And so, what do we do about it? Well, I think we push back a little bit. I think we shine light on it.
Well, and I think that's what I tried to do in the legislature, and you were a great supporter of that, starting with getting government out of the way of free expression. So you asked a minute ago, who should change this? How should it change? Is it a legislative function, a congressional function? I think the problem existed and has existed in my time in the legislature, that the government has gotten in the way. Like you said, the government took a Supreme Court standard of what is or speech that is objectively offensive, and then turned it completely 100% subjective. So now anything goes. If I say I'm harassed, I'm harassed. But further, If I feel I'm harassed or I feel offended, somebody has to be punished for doing that, for offending me, which has really been the heart of the problem. Is it's significantly chilled speech, and it has resulted in students facing sanctions for what really is their free speech, constitutionally protected speech. And so I think, I don't, there's sometimes government is government's not the best place or even an appropriate place to move culture, force culture. Government is typically a reflection of culture, but government can absolutely get in the way. And as it has on our college campuses, of free expression and free exchange of ideas. And when you don't have that, then all kinds of other stuff comes in. And that's really what we've seen. We've seen, our that notion of our college campus as the bastion of free exchange of ideas has really been missing. I think it's been evolving for a while, but the federal government put it in policy. Our public institutions codified it in their policy and their procedures about 2011. And so really we've had this just an upside down world on the college campus. I'm not there right now. I kind of thank goodness for that. But I do have children who have been on the college campus during those years. You as a professor, what do you see? And does this also encroach into the classroom? So what we've been seeing on college campus is sort of what we call the milieu. It's sort of the space in between. But how's this creeped into your classroom? How do you feel as a professor when it comes to your ability to freely exercise your academia? And what do you see in the interaction with students?
Well, I spent many years as an economics professor, and in that setting, I would probably be forced into situations where we talk about things like, the benefits of capitalism and the comparisons with other economic systems. But now being in a more objective, let's say, data analytics space, where we look at data and we say, what is the data telling us? And you can actually measure things against more objective standards. But I have been criticized in class for basically showing political data at times and saying, what can you interpret from this? And I look at things like, well, if we only look at data over the past 5 years rather than the past 30 years, things look very different. And I teach people how to objectively look at that. And I think in that setting, there's not as much controversy, right? You can stay away from some of the debates. But, I've attended diversity conferences that we've had on campus. And what I find amazing is that you go into this conference and you think, okay, yeah, diversity, that's a good idea. But what you find out is the only thing that's not diverse about the crowd is the way they think. So rather than a diversity of thought, an exchange of ideas, it becomes almost like an echo chamber where they're all saying the same thing. And I think that's a shame, because I think there's certain topics that we would be much better off having vigorous debates about, rather than trying to shut people down because of their point of view that may differ from, when you think about it, this whole movement to cultural Marxism really come down to, it's a shame culture that looks at oppressed versus oppressors. And if you happen to be in the oppressive class, then you shouldn't be listened to, right? And so that's interesting. So those are the only thoughts that are shut down. And I think that's something that needs to change in order for us to come to better solutions for social problems that we might have.
Well, as a proponent of campus free speech protections, I really am value content neutral on that. And And
Yeah.
I want to protect all speech, even the speech and maybe even especially the speech that I disagree with. And I think for a while the universities didn't really believe that. But I did sponsor legislation with Senator Jim DeBacchus, who is a Democrat, was a Democrat senator. And we sat on the dais one day together, and we heard some debate about free speech, and we had our heads together and thinking, wait, everybody should value this. That everybody should value this. It's so foundational to our country. And so together we decided we would run a bill together that was a resolution encouraging the protection of campus civil rights and namely free speech, and was really proud to do that with him and to be able to emphasize that this is not free speech and freedom of expression is not a partisan issue, and it's sometimes into one. I experienced that these bills, when I was trying to pass campus protection, frequently looked pretty partisan, but it's really not. It's 100% what America is about. So how we change this moving forward? Let's first get government out of the way of punishing students or threatening the punishment of students for speech that is their constitutional right to express. What about research? What do you see in the area of research and academic freedom?
Well, I think that's pretty that's pretty wide open. We do have, when we got $25 million coming in from the Charles Koch Foundation, that tended to raise a ruckus on campus from people that didn't like some particular policies that the Koch Foundation had. But I think they were rather misinformed, really, because that money actually had fewer strings attached than any money we've ever gotten before. And so,
Okay, wait, hold on a second. So research grant money can have strings attached?
well, yeah, I mean, you see that all the time, especially money that's coming from private donors, right? I mean, if you look at things like that, yeah, there are strings attached, but what you need to look at more objectively is, are these people actually conducting legitimate research? Are they being pressured by outside groups to change the way they talk on campus? And I mean, it's like money in politics in a way, right? I mean, there are influences that happen, but I think for the most part, people are fairly honest about what they believe, and especially academics in doing their research. They believe certain things, and they're passionate about those things. And sometimes money comes because of that passion that they have. And so, I mean, you could talk about money in politics too, and you get kind of the same thing, right? So,
Right. So making sure that the objectives of that research money are clean and really in the interest of the pursuit of knowledge.
right.
And when it comes to any parameters that come with that grant money, to make sure those you described them as rules are sort of as clean, unrestricted as possible, so that science can be science and the pursuit
Yeah.
of knowledge. Okay, so I want to back up and talk about a couple things. You use the phrase big data. I first became aware of you back in, I want to say 2011 or 2012. You had developed an app, a way of viewing certain analytics and harmonizing them together so that you could predict behavior and predict outcomes in elections.
Yeah.
And so can you talk about that? I know, I think you developed this, and now maybe you're no longer the proprietor of it, or what can you share about
No,
that?
we started a company called
Okay.
Politicket.com, and we were noticing that there were some peculiar things that were happening in the election. And this is actually the first time that Huntsman ran. It's the first time that Mitt Romney ran. And we were noticing that there was a real change in momentum in that election, if you recall. And we started noticing some peculiar things in the data. So what we did is we built some intelligent agents that would go out every night and it would gather data on the internet. It would look at Facebook. It would look at Google Trends. It would look at even how many times people looked at a Wikipedia page. It looked at Twitter and Facebook and what people were saying and how they were saying it and who they were talking about. And the general idea was that if someone generates a lot of buzz, that they'll probably be doing better in the elections. And so what we would do, we actually built a machine learning program. And so we automated these bots that would go out every night and gather data. And then we trained what was called a neural network, a machine learning algorithm, to find the pattern between what buzz they generated and how they were doing in the polls. And then we started to notice that they actually predicted the polls pretty well. And so we were able to kind of track the momentum of different candidates. And then after the primary, we actually went back to how voters really responded in different areas of the country and how that related to the data they were generating. Well, by the time the final election came around that year, we got about 93% of all the races in the U.S. correct.
That was incredible.
And you think about it, it's like anything. Momentum really follows the buzz that you're generating, right?
Right.
And so one of the nice things about this model, though, was that we could run it every single day to kind of gauge how different strategies you were using actually influenced maybe the outcomes. Well, we actually found that was a useful measure that businesses could use to generate to gear the buzz that they were generating. And so we still own that technology. We own the company, but we started another company called Redbird Metrics, and we actually are implementing some of that same technology for businesses to use. And this is more of a social media platform and being able to judge what's going on in social media. Big data, though, is a big thing in politics. You look at what they've done at I360 and some other organizations in really tracking data and micro-targeting voters, and a lot of that came out of this same sort of methodology.
Okay, so first of all, I have to ask you, how valuable is a poll that has a 9-point plus or minus margin of error?
Well, I mean,
because there's one out there.
It's really interesting because polling's changed a lot, right? When we used to have telephones tied to the wall, you were able to actually, do telephone polls and get a decent, stratified sample of people. But, it's just like the press today. When you're driven by clicks, right, you have to ask yourself sometimes, how are these polls doing? It's funny, when Trump ran the first time for the White House, all the polls were saying that he was going to get beat badly. We actually published our results. We hadn't had time to really recalibrate our models, and so we were thinking, man, these aren't doing very well. He's sure not. The polls. We're not predicting the polls very well. Well, we finally said we're going to publish the results, and so 2 nights before the election, we published them, and we said that the popular vote would probably go to Hillary, but all the key states seem to be falling in line for Trump, and we actually published an electoral map that looked pretty much like what happened. And so you have to ask yourself, why weren't those polls very accurate?
Well, I tease about this 9-point plus or minus because that with my background in research methods, and statistics, you would never want that poll to see the light of day. But there's one that keeps popping up once in a while with a 9 point margin of error. But yeah, we see polls. I think we see very flawed polls. I think not trying to give us a finger on the pulse, but trying to actually push and influence outcomes. And like you said, momentum tends to follow an outcome. I think sometimes media, individuals, different outlets try to use bad and flawed data to then give a perception of momentum. And so to have the tool that you developed that was really dispassionate about the individuals or the outcome, but just really looked at the science of big data at the time, I think was fascinating to me. And I watched how accurate you were. I watched how closely that tool did predict the results. And I thought that was just fascinating. And I don't think I had met you personally yet, but I had watched your work, and it was just fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're really moving to an era where big data and this whole notion of micro targeting voters, right? And it kind of scoots over to the point where you say, is that really, when you start talking about harvesting votes, that starts to get into the space where you say, is that really what we want to happen in our constitutional republic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that, is that the way we want to go with our elections and everything else? And so it brings up some interesting issues.
So, and not just elections, but this. So technology tends to have, seems like new technology has a plus side and it has a bad side, that if it can be used wrong, or if you can perceive of the technology being used for good, you can also perceive it being used for evil. But so we do have a concern about technology and the level of our behavioral tracking that we have, and some of it we consent to. So if I download an app, if I choose to purchase a device, somewhere in a user agreement, sometimes obscurely, sometimes more prominently, I am consenting to being tracked or having my data collected in different ways. And sometimes when we talk about government and privacy and the ethics of privacy, I will have people, inevitably say, oh, but look at the device you have. You're tracked all day long. There's a big difference between what I, as a consumer, consent to do or have collected around me versus the government tracking me. And there's a big, big difference. I am actually really, really shocked sometimes at how many people I interact with don't see a difference at all. And we can talk about consumer data. We can talk about the private use of data and all day long. But boy, we go to a whole different place if we start talking about the government being able to track you or choosing to track you. And so sometimes, I can search, like this is a little bit creepy. I can search something on my phone this morning, and an hour later on my computer, I get ads for that product. Well, so part of me says, oh, thank you. That just made things a lot easier for me. But at the same time, I go, wow, this is everything we do. It seems like, are they reading my mind?
Yeah.
So there is that flip side of all the benefits that technology can give us. Now there's an ethics of privacy, and how much do we want bots or algorithms chasing us and trying to predict our behavior, maybe even ultimately trying to influence our behavior when that ad comes up about the product that I had searched earlier. And So, this is a whole new world of data privacy. As a legislator, we've dealt with that a lot on making sure that we balance any new technology, any new programming with data security, data
Right.
privacy. So you're
Well, you
right
look at
smack dab in that world.
yeah. Well, you look at the bill that just failed the other night by one vote, right? Where they were trying to rein in a little bit of the Patriot Act and this whole idea of them being able to read your email without a search warrant.
She's
And I was shocked that it actually failed to pass. But it's scary that way, right? Because I mean, there's a constitutional right to this whole idea of improper search and seizure, right? And so where are the protections there? And I think you know like Franklin said, I mean, people are going to give up some privacy for security. And I mean, you look at the whole thing with the COVID thing now, right? Does the government really have that right to tell people they have to stay in their homes? Well, you look at what happened in China. I mean, they were literally welding people into their houses. It's one thing to say that that's sick has to stay home, but does a healthy person really, by the force of government, stay home? And so there's this balance that you have to worry about.
And there really is. Last month the legislature, in part of a bill that dealt with the federal funding that would be dispersed through the state, looked at an app that people could voluntarily subscribe to, and that would help them maybe view their the ability to communicate the disease. I don't know, it's hard to explain. Really struggled with that, and kind of landed on the place where, okay, it's all voluntary. And some of the people that I really go to for reviewing liberty issues and freedom issues, we kind of landed on, if it is absolutely your choice. This is not a government mandate. It's not going to turn into a government mandate. But sometimes I choose to have conveniences that are related to tracking my behavior. I use a navigation instrument that I really love on my phone, and that is absolutely dependent upon satellites watching where I am and other vehicles that feed that satellite impression of everything that's going on to tell me the best route to get to work and
Yeah.
fastest way to get to a place. So, there are times where we do consent, and there are conveniences. And so those choices, as long as it's a choice, is one thing. When it becomes the government surveilling without due process, without proper things like search warrants, we get into a very scary place. And I have been telling John, I don't know if you've seen any of these, but for people who watch these regularly, I probably say every night that especially in a crisis is a time to be hypervigilant. And people are always asking me, like you just said, can the government do this? Can they really tell me to shut my business down? Can they really tell me to go home, stay home? And I say yes, they can, if you let them, if we let
Yeah.
them. And so much can happen in the name of a crisis. So much can happen through the exploitation of crisis and emergency situations that really, more than ever, is when we need to be vigilant about our civil rights. And so here we are, and there are these balances between data privacy, data security. We see breaches all the time
Right.
in data security. So just crazy world that, in very, challenging times when it comes to this. We do have technology with all of its benefits, and then there can be the risks that come with that. And you're living in
Well,
that
that's one of
world.
the things. That's one of the things I appreciate about you, though, is you think of these things in terms of our basic liberties, right? And you say, I mean, some people can say, well, your liberty stops at my nose, right? But where does it actually stop? Do you have the right to impose things on me that are to my detriment, right?
Mm.
And so, I mean, these are interesting issues, but when you're grounded in the ideas of individual liberty and freedom, then you look at these things differently, right? And this is a tough issue because you say, well, yeah, but we want to flatten the curve, and that's important, right? We don't want to overwhelm our healthcare system. We don't want many people dying, and so they're difficult issues sometimes. But you have to come back to this notion of individual liberties and freedoms that people have, and you say, is this going to fundamentally change the way we look at things? You know, and people can push this too far, I think.
Well, and I think what's also been highlighted here in the last 2 months is how much we came to rely on algorithmic formula. That we said, okay, we're going to put a certain level of trust in experts because they're predictive models. And there is some good science behind predictive modeling. And going back to my own education in research methods and statistics, we do kind of get as much data as we can and then try to interpret the last 20% or try to make that data have through some interpretation. And like you indicated earlier, there's some hard science, but then everybody brings their worldview, their bias, their their thoughts into those models. They don't just interpret themselves either. And I think we have seen some concern that we maybe did rely on too much predictive modeling. What do
Well,
you say about that?
well, I, you know, you can say data isn't biased, and that's true if you see all the information, right? And I was big into this tax referendum issue, right? One of the things that
Were
bothered
you on
me
the
the
right
most.
side of that? Because I was one of the few Republicans who voted against that.
Well, I can tell you one thing. Here's one thing that really bothered me. Okay, was the idea that we were selling this as the biggest tax decrease in history. But there was one little fact they failed to tell people, and that was during the Trump tax cuts, the standard deduction forms changed,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there was a windfall to Utah because of that. And rather than dealing with it, I think that was held back as a carrot to say, oh, well, we can reduce taxes and we can change the tax structure. And I agree that there's probably a structural imbalance that needs to be dealt with. And I actually looked at the data, but you could see that windfall that came from the Trump tax cuts. Well, to me, it it's an absolute true statement that that was a huge tax cut. What they didn't tell you that was how much was the tax increase to offset against that tax cut. And when you actually look at it, you say, oh, well, that tax cut that they made was close to the windfall that we got, right? And to me, that's so you're telling the truth, but you're not telling the whole story. And that's what happens sometimes with data. And we find that there are political agendas. I mean, the whole climate science area. There's so much politics involved and people with agendas that are trying to drive things there that sometimes you really doubt the data that you're being shown. And it's like anything, right?
Well, and with this current pandemic, I think we will look back and see that we did rely on predictive modeling that ended up not being so accurate in some aspects of it. So John, I've got to say a couple things about you. So you are running for Senate District 19 in our
Right.
Utah Senate, and
Right.
why do you want to do that?
Well, actually, it took a number of friends to talk me into doing it.
It's usually how
I,
that
I
happens.
I've been one that sat on the sidelines, and I generally, I'll sit back, and if I see candidates that are doing a good job, I might send them a check, right? And not with the idea that I'm going to get something in return for it, but because I think they're being good public servants, and they're working hard, and they're trying to do the right thing. And at some point in your life, though, you sit back and you say, well, the right thing isn't necessarily happening. And I'm sure that drives you in a lot of ways in taking on this congressional seat, because this isn't an easy process that you're going through right now. But I think we need more principled, liberty minded people who actually believe in Reagan's vision of this shining city on a hill, right? And believe in the
Absolutely.
American dream, and believe that socialism is not a good thing for us, and that cronyism and other things happen even in the great state of Utah, right? And
Absolutely. And, so people tell me frequently, when you go to Congress and Congress is sort of broken and the needle barely moves, you can do better. You can do more at the state level. And I believe that. I just came from, or I'm finishing out my 6th year in the Utah legislature, and we can move as a state quicker and respond to state needs. And that's really where it should be more. So I don't have a problem that I may go to Congress and watch things move very slowly. It was kind of designed that way, but we need good people at all levels of government. So I love that I've been able to serve in the Utah House and have, I feel like I've made a difference. But by golly, I'm going to Congress because I'm going with all my defensive gear on and ready to stop the socialism, rip out every root of socialism I can so that we can preserve America. But I'm excited for you at the state level that you can be in one of those seats that can make real active and a real change, real impacts on our state. And I know you to be that person who values our constitutional rights and will speak out. And I even at risk to your job, maybe even some of the things you may say might everybody in your sector might not agree in academia, but I value you as somebody who's willing to say it, willing to talk about what's really going on on our college campuses. And so when you go to the Senate, how are you going to stop the out of control escalation of the cost of higher education? And could you just answer that in the last 2 minutes that we have?
well,
I was
you
kidding, but
know,
yeah, please.
here's one thing that I think is a problem, and that's, and it's like the time, and we won't go into details. It's like the time you showed up at a faculty senate meeting and just shined some light on some things. Okay, and I think just a little bit of moral suasion. I'm a big defender of academic liberty, right? It's the same thing as liberty in general. I'm a big defender of academic freedom. I'm a big defender of universities making their decisions. But I also think that we can shine light on things that don't make sense. right? Buildings on campuses. I mean, it's real easy to say, oh well, we need $40 million for this new classroom, right? And the state legislature looks at it and says, oh well, we have this one-time money that we can spend, right?
Jeez.
And so it happens, right? And so, yeah, I think there's a certain amount of pushback. There's moral suasion that can take place. You have a certain bully pulpit in a way. Just by showing up at the right time, sometimes you can affect decision making.
Well,
I hope I get put on the higher ed committee.
I don't know if you will, and here's why. Because a couple years ago, we had the Commissioner of Higher Education on the stand in a Higher Education Appropriations Committee that I was a member of. That is as close as oversight as you get as a legislator. And that is the committee that gets to decide how much money we appropriate to which school for which purpose. And so I asked a question. And my real question dealt with, if we are a single system of higher education, how come the same math class that's taught here costs 3 times more as the same math class, same accreditation, everything, presumably same quality of the instruction, the content, and so forth? How can there be such a disparity in the cost if we're in the single system of higher education? And the commissioner said, Representative, it would be unwise for the legislature to ask those sorts of questions. That's why we have presidents and deans. Complete shiver down my spine, a little bit of wow. I was not okay with that answer. And that's the kind of pushback you may experience if you're in that committee. I think you probably you get to ask for your committee assignments, by the way, and hope you get them. And I think they should put you on with your expertise on that committee. But I have been in the position of asking the questions, and I've been deflected. My questions have been deflected. Early on, I asked, how do we, I noticed after serving on that committee for days and hours in a row, nobody was asking the questions about the cost. And I thought, this is the money committee for higher education. And, one of my first questions as a freshman, and I apologized, and I said, I might be asking kind of a foolish freshman question, but is this the committee that we get to talk about the out-of-control skyrocketing costs of higher ed? And I was told, yeah, this is the committee, but there's a whole lot of books you can go read with a lot of theories. And I thought, wow, that's where we are. So, you're going to serve with really good people, but you will have pushback from government agencies. You will get, you'll get some pushback from higher education, as I saw it, trying to protect campus free speech rights and due process rights. But it is a very, very complicated thing, our cost of higher education, and it's huge. One thing I like about COVID, I'm looking for all the silver linings with our current pandemic response. One thing I pushed every year was, can we have more flexibility in classrooms with course content, with graduation requirements, things like that? Can we please move to a competency-based education system where if it doesn't matter how many hours your butt is in a seat, if you can pass the test, why sit through the class? Can we provide more flexibility for students? I got a lot of feedback from students that they crave the flexibility to learn at their own pace, to have independent learning, things like that. And the institutions of higher education just could not get there fast enough, and had all these reasons why, you can't really do online, you can't really do independent learning, virtual classrooms. And then as we've started to see some of those come online, they've cost more than the brick and mortar class. So they've been charging students more to have an online class where in most cases, it's in a can. It's not even, active instruction. So no cost of brick and mortar, sometimes no active instruction. So the HR goes down, but these students were being charged more. And we got all kinds of explanations about, why it's just not going to work to meet the demand of students. But now we're in this situation where there hasn't been a choice. And I really kind of like that. I like that we have now stressed an ancient model. And we complain about our K-12 students in rows and, with so little flexibility. But of all places that should be pioneering is higher ed to create more flexibility. And well, now they had to. So I hope that they have now seen that this is a model that we do need to have far more flexibility. And yeah, guess what? We can do it, and we can continue to develop those kinds of tools to be better, more effective for students.
That's one area I think the Utah State's actually done a pretty good job at.
Yeah.
Being the land grant school and actually, I know Rhonda Minlove. I don't know if you remember her from the lecture,
Yes.
but she did a lot of interesting things while she was at USU in building up the distance learning capabilities. And it's really lucky that they spent those resources on being able to do that. It was quite a stretch on faculty to go from a face-to-face class to an online class in 2 days.
Oh, definitely.
But I think you're right. We have learned that there are some things that are more effective, and I think this moving to this, to a hybrid type system is really helpful.
Well,
There's
because
a certain amount of learning that does better face to face, but.
And not just learning, but there is the social aspect, and we are learning now too how much we truly do crave and benefit from being together and these things. So let me ask you this. So this is I'm already getting my team telling me that we're over. So
Okay, sorry.
Let me ask you. I had recently had a reporter ask me if I'm elected, what I would do regarding public education in Congress, and I said nothing. I said nothing because I don't think that is the proper place for that kind of policy to be made. But the federal government definitely has their fingers all through higher education. So notwithstanding our issues with, or not just our issues with Title IX and things like that, where Secretary of Education has led some reforms, what would you want me to do in Congress regarding higher education?
Well, I think the more local education is, the better, and I believe that even you're looking at voucher systems and other things. You have to think about some of these magnet schools as being laboratories of learning, and rather than push, say, Common Core math on the masses, wouldn't that be a great place to try it out? And to fully develop the curriculum and fully develop the ideas and see how well it works. And not saying that we want to experiment on kids, but why throw everybody into that situation to begin with? And that's where I find competition. If competition is good in business, then wouldn't it make sense that it would be good in education?
Absolutely. So yes, I would. Regarding higher education, I would like to get the federal government as much out of that space. And same as K-12 is that so many decisions are better done. Well, probably every decision is just better done at that local level. So, but let's at least do what we need to do to get higher education regulations out of the way of our state and institutions to be able to make better decisions at the more local level. Okay, so we're out of time, but so tell us how people can find you and find out more about your Senate 19 race.
Okay, so I have a website, johnforutah.com, and you can find me on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and it's all John for Utah.
FOR number 4.
Yeah, FOR,
Okay.
John, JOHN, FOR, Utah.com.
Okay. All righty. So anybody who's in that area, what is that area? What city?
So we're talking about North Ogden, Pleasant View, and then we actually go up over into Eden and the Valley,
Okay.
and then it takes a jog up to part of Morgan County, and then all the way to Summit County, which is kind of an interesting way that they split it up.
Summit County, right?
Yeah, so we actually have voters that are in Park City, but just the more eastern part of Park City. So it's a pretty spread out district. I
And
would say the bulk of the voters are in North Ogden and Pleasant View.
okay, so if you live in any of those areas and you want to know more about John, go to John for, tell us again, John for Utah and .com. And none of that is in CD4 in the 4th Congressional
Right.
District where I'm running.
Yeah, and I actually wished we were, because it would be a pleasure to have a representative like you that's a strong defender of liberty, and I've followed your progress a lot, and I appreciate the things that you're doing, and you have to ask people sometimes, how's your soul, and what do you really believe inside. And I think that's one quality that you have that will make you a really great representative. So I hope that people recognize that, and I hope they recognize that your values really are Utah values, and we don't have to be ashamed of those.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for being with us tonight. It's always easier for me to have somebody to talk to. We did cover some issues we haven't covered in any of these yet. So thank you so much for being with us tonight in your living room or wherever you're watching us. And you can find me at kimforutah.com, KIMFOR Utah.com. I would really love your vote. We have a primary that is just around the corner. So please go sign up if you want to follow me. If you want to donate or volunteer, we need all of that as well. So we are a front-running candidate. We did just win the convention a couple weeks ago. And go to my website if you have a moment. Go to kimforutah.com and see who's supporting the race. Some really great policy leaders that are saying, Kim, we've watched your record. We see that you really are this true constitutional fighter, protector, and we need you to come back and help us and help preserve this great country that we have, and make sure that we root out any vestiges of socialism, and let's preserve our country to be the free America that we've been so blessed to live in. So we'll see you tomorrow night, and go to Facebook and go to our website, because we have a really full week and some exciting guests this whole week. So thank you, Dr. Johnson, for being with us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
So nice to see you. Thank you.
Thanks. Good night.
Okay. Good night.